She was the quiet nurse no one defended. When the chief surgeon yanked her hair in front of the entire ER, the room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Fear spread faster than blood on the floor. They thought she would cry. They thought she would run. But they didn't know who she really was. Seconds later, a dying man's heart flatlined, and the weak nurse stepped forward. What happened next shattered careers, exposed buried crimes, and saved more than one life. By the time the truth came out, the hospital would never be the same again. And the woman they tried to silence? She walked out not as a victim, but as the reason everyone else finally found their courage. The night shift at Ridgeway Medical had its own soundtrack. Fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects. Wheels squeaked. Heart monitors argued with each other in sharp, impatient beeps. Somewhere down the hall, an ambulance backed up with that endless warning tone, like the building itself was counting down. It was 2:11 a.m. in Portland, Oregon, the hour when caffeine stopped being helpful and started being a religion. And at the nurse's station in trauma, Mara Quinn stood perfectly still, sorting charts as if the paper could save her. She was 32, though the tired lines around her eyes made her look older when the light hit her wrong. Her dark hair was twisted into a messy bun and pinned tight under a standard Navy scrub cap. She wore oversized blue scrubs that hung on her frame like she'd borrowed them from someone bigger. Her badge read, Mara Quinn, RN nothing else. No extra certifications clipped to the lanyard, no charge, no preceptor, no colorful badge reels, no jokes, no small talk, just a name and a job title, like she was trying to keep her existence simple enough that nobody would notice it. It wasn't working. Hey, a voice whispered from behind the crash cart. Ghost nurse is doing paperwork again. A small group of staff near the coffee machine, 2 nurses, 1 tech, and an exhausted resident, laughed quietly. The way people laugh when they want to feel powerful but don't want to get caught. Mara didn't react. She didn't look up. Her fingers moved calmly, sliding charts into neat piles, aligning edges until the corners matched, like they were military issued. 3 months, Chloe Nguyen muttered. Chloe was newish too, still young enough to wear bright scrubs without irony. 3 months, and I've heard her talk like twice. She talks, David Calder said, the charge nurse. He was in his 40s, built like someone who'd played football before he discovered night shift and energy drinks. Just not to people she doesn't trust. That's everybody, Chloe said. David's mouth twitched like he wanted to defend Mara but didn't know how without making it weird. In the ER, silence could be a shield, but it could also paint a target on your back. Mara finished a stack of charts and slid them into the correct rack. Then she reached for a bottle of sanitizer, rubbed her hands until they were dry, and adjusted the long sleeves under her scrubs. Even in the overheated chaos of trauma, she wore a fitted undershirt that covered her wrists. Always. No one asked why. No one asked anything about Mara Quinn, really. Not in a way that mattered. People asked where she was from. She said, Ohio, and nothing more. They asked where she trained. She said, a VA hospital, and went back to work. They asked why her file had so many blacked-out sections, why the background check came back cleared, with the details sealed. Mara didn't answer. And because she didn't answer, the staff filled the space with their own story. Travel nurse, burnout, anxiety, charity hire, liability. A nurse who flinched too hard when a bedpan dropped. A nurse who never made eye contact. A nurse who moved slowly, deliberately, like she was bracing for impact that never came. A nurse who made experienced people uncomfortable because she didn't perform the usual social rituals of being liked. Then, from the double doors of Trauma Bay 4, a voice cracked like a whip. "Bennett!" Not Bennett. Mara. But Dr. Grant Hale had never bothered to learn names unless they belonged to people who mattered. Mara turned, slow and careful. Dr. Grant Hale stood in the doorway like a headline. He was 45 and handsome in the kind of polished way that belonged on hospital billboards. Sharp jaw, perfect hair, white coat that fit like it had been tailored. Even at 2 a.m, he looked like he had time to sleep, and he carried himself like the entire building was his personal kingdom. "Where's my instrument tray?" he snapped, eyes flicking over the hallway as if searching for someone else to blame for the fact that reality existed. Mara's voice came out soft, controlled. "It's in sterile processing, doctor. There. I don't care where it is," Hale cut in, stepping closer. The air around him smelled like expensive cologne layered over antiseptic. "I care that it isn't in my hands." Behind him in the bay, a drunk college kid was strapped to a gurney with a deep laceration running across his scalp. Blood had dried in a sticky line down his temple. Hale didn't look at the kid. He looked at Mara like she was an inconvenience in human form. "You had one job," Hale said, voice low enough that it felt intimate, like a threat whispered in church. "And you missed it. Again." Mara didn't flinch. Not outwardly, but her pupils widened slightly. Her throat tightened. Only the people trained to notice would have caught it. David, watching from the nurse's station, shifted his weight like he wanted to step in. He didn't. No one did. Because Grant Hale wasn't just the chief trauma surgeon. He was a donor magnet. He was a board favorite. He was the face Ridgway used in fundraising campaigns. He was protected, and everyone knew it. "Apologies," Mara said quietly. "I'll get a replacement tray from Bay 1. Hale scoffed and brushed past her, intentionally close, his shoulder clipping her arm. It wasn't enough to hurt. It was enough to remind her she was in his space, not the other way around. When Mara stepped into the supply closet, the sound of the ER faded into a muffled hum. For a moment, she let herself lean her forehead against the cool metal shelf. One breath in, hold. One breath out. A rhythm. A count. Something to keep the past where it belonged. Her hands were steady. Always steady. People thought her hands shook because she was weak. They didn't know what weak looked like. Weak was the smell of burning fuel in the back of a helicopter that was going down. Weak was hearing a man beg you not to let him die while your gloves were slick with blood and the world was shaking apart around you. Mara closed her eyes for half a second, and her brain offered her a memory like a knife. A different kind of light. Red. Flickering. A voice in her ear shouting coordinates. Metal screaming. Her fingers curled tighter around the edge of the shelf. Stop. She reached for the rubber band on her wrist and snapped it once. Sharp, quick pain. A grounding trick. When she opened her eyes, she was back in Ridgway's supply closet, surrounded by gauze and saline and cheap plastic. Civilian life. Simple. Safe. Except it wasn't safe. Not really, because chaos didn't care what uniform you wore. And Ridgway Medical was drowning in chaos tonight. The overhead PA crackled. "Trauma team to Ambulance Bay. ETA 2 minutes. Multi-vehicle collision. 2 criticals inbound." The words hit the ER like a thrown brick. Everything changed in a blink. Chairs scraped, people moved, voices rose. The hum of routine transformed into the sharp, coordinated noise of survival. Mara pushed away from the shelf and walked out of the closet with the instrument tray she'd found tucked behind a stack of dressings. Her face was calm. Her eyes were not. They were sharp now, awake in a way they hadn't been when she was quietly aligning paper. She moved toward the bay with the same deliberate pace, but something had shifted under the surface. David intercepted her near the nurse's station. "You okay?" he asked softly, keeping his body angled to block the view from Hale. Mara paused like she had to decide whether to answer honestly. Then she gave him the smallest nod. "I'm fine." David didn't look convinced, but he let it go, like everyone else did. The sliding doors at the ambulance entrance blew open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust and something metallic that always meant trouble. Paramedics rolled in fast, pushing gurneys like they were racing death down a hallway. Hale stepped forward immediately, transforming into a different person the moment there was an audience. "Talk to me," he barked, loud and commanding, hero voice activated. "Male, approximately 50, the lead medic shouted. "Chest trauma, abdominal trauma. BP 70/40, tachy, lost pulse twice en route." "Bay 1, Hale ordered. "Move!" A second gurney followed, smaller, covered in a blanket soaked dark. Mara saw the outline of a shoulder, a tattoo half visible under blood and rainwater, and something in her chest tightened. Not fear, recognition. The first patient's blanket slipped as they transferred him, and Mara saw it clearly, ink on skin, sharp and unmistakable even through bruising, a winged dagger. Her breath caught before she could stop it, because that symbol wasn't random. It was a language, and it belonged to a world Mara had been trying to bury. Hale snapped his fingers. "Quinn, suction in Bay 1. Do not mess it up." Mara didn't answer. She stepped into position at the head of the bed, took the suction catheter, and looked down at the patient's face. He was built like a tank. Gray beard, broad shoulders, tactical muscle under civilian clothes shredded by scissors. His eyes were half open. And when Mara saw his jawline, swollen, bruised, something cold slid down her spine. Because she knew him. Not by name. By history. By the way some faces never leave you after you've seen them under the worst sky on earth. Mara's hands didn't shake. Not once. The monitor screamed. The room narrowed. And somewhere behind the noise, a part of Mara Quinn, the part she'd tried to turn into a ghost, lifted its head and listened. Because the battlefield had found her again. And it didn't care that she was wearing scrubs. The ER never stayed loud for long. It surged, it screamed, it swelled with urgency, and then, between disasters, it held its breath. Those pauses were dangerous. They gave people time to think, to judge, to choose targets. Mara Quinn felt it the moment the gurneys rolled past and the doors slid shut again. Dr. Grant Hale had tasted adrenaline, and like always, it made him cruel. "Pressure's garbage," Hale snapped, snapping his gloves tighter as if the latex offended him. "Why is suction lagging?" "It isn't," Mara said quietly. She kept her eyes on the catheter, steady, precise. "Airways compromised. Bloods." "I didn't ask for commentary." Hale cut in. "I asked for results." Across the bay, David shot Mara a warning look. Chloe stood frozen by the med cart, knuckles white around a saline bag. The patient, identified on the board as John Doe, mid-50s, coughed weakly. Frothy blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. Mara noticed the bubbles immediately. Her brain flagged it like a flare. That's not just bleeding. She leaned closer, adjusted the catheter angle by millimeters. The bubbling changed pitch. Hale missed it. He was already reaching for paddles, eyes on the monitor like it owed him obedience. "Charge to 200, he barked, We're losing him. Mara swallowed. Doctor, she said, louder than before. Not loud, but firm. Breath sounds are diminished on the right. Hale didn't look at her. Everyone hears diminished breath sounds in trauma, he said. That's why it's called trauma. The patient's chest rose unevenly. Left side heaved. Right side barely moved. Mara's gaze flicked to the neck. Jugular vein, distended. Her pulse kicked harder. Hale, she tried again, breaking protocol by using his name. His trachea. Do not lecture me in my own bay, Hale snapped, spinning toward her now. His face was flushed, eyes bright with the kind of rage that came from being questioned in public. You are here to assist, not diagnose. Behind him, the monitor shrieked. Heart rate spiked. Blood pressure dropped another notch. David stepped forward. Grant, maybe we should... Stay in your lane, Calder. Hale shot back. Just everyone always wants to be a hero. He grabbed the paddles. Clear. The shock slammed through the patient's body. His back arched. The smell of ozone snapped through the room. Flatline. The sound drilled straight through Mara's skull. No, she said under her breath. Again, Hale ordered. 300. Mara's chest felt tight now, like the air had thickened. This is wrong. She saw it the way she'd seen it before. Patterns lining up, alarms ringing that didn't make noise. Air trapped, pressure building, heart being strangled. She reached instinctively for the supply tray. A 14-gauge angiocath glinted under the lights. Mara, Chloe whispered, terrified. What are you? Hale shocked again. Nothing. Damn it, Hale snarled. We're calling it. No, Mara said. The word came out colder than she expected. It sliced clean through the noise. Hale turned slowly. What did you say? She met his eyes, just for a second. No, she repeated. He's not gone. You're shocking against pressure. He needs decompression. The room went silent in that unnatural way that only happened when authority was challenged. Hale laughed. Actually laughed. You think you know better than me? He said, voice dripping disbelief. You think because you watched a YouTube video... Look at his neck, Mara said, pointing. Look at the asymmetry. He has tension pneumothorax. If we don't release it, his heart can't fill. You are a nurse, Hale roared. You do not overrule me. The patient convulsed weakly. A single, shallow breath rattled out. Mara didn't think anymore. Thinking was too slow. She stepped forward, angiocath in hand. Hale stepped into her path. Get out of my way, she said. He stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Then his face twisted, and something ugly surfaced. He reached out. His fingers tangled in the back of her scrub cap, knotted in her hair, and he yanked her head back hard enough that white light burst behind her eyes. Know your place, Hale hissed, breath hot on her cheek. Trash. The room froze. The angiocath slipped from Mara's fingers and clattered against the tile. Pain flared along her scalp, not blinding but sharp enough to wake something old. She stumbled back into a metal cabinet. The clang echoed like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, everyone waited for her to break. For tears, for apologies, for collapse. Mara lifted her hand and adjusted her scrub cap back into place. Slowly. Carefully. When she looked up, the softness was gone. Her shoulders squared, her stance widened by inches. She spoke quietly. You shouldn't have done that. Hale scoffed. Get security. Get her out of here. David's voice shook. Grant, you can't. Now. Mara moved. Not like a nurse. Not like a civilian. Hale reached for her again, angry, careless. She stepped inside his reach, trapped his wrist, twisted, just enough to light up the radial nerve, and swept his leg. Hale hit the floor hard, the sound wet and final. A gasp ripped through the bay. Mara released him immediately and turned back to the patient. "David," she said, voice steady as stone. "Time me." "What?" David croaked. "Now!" She grabbed a fresh angiocath, found the second intercostal space without hesitation, and drove the needle in. Ch-s-s-s. The sound of trapped air escaping filled the room. The monitor chirped. Once. Twice. Sinus rhythm. The patient sucked in a deep, desperate breath like a drowning man breaking the surface. Mara exhaled. She stripped off her gloves and dropped them in the bin. "He's back," she said calmly. "Chest tube next. ICU transport as soon as he's stable." She looked down at Hale, who was scrambling upright, clutching his wrist, face purple with shock and humiliation. "And you," she added, eyes flat, "are done." The ER didn't celebrate miracles. It documented them. The monitor steadied into a clean, rhythmic pulse. Blood pressure crawled back from the edge. Oxygen saturation climbed, slow but real. The patient, no longer John Doe, had color returning to his face. Around the bed, people moved again, like a spell had broken. "Chest tube tray," Chloe blurted, almost tripping over the words. "I see you now," David said, finding his voice. "Call it in." Mara stayed at the head of the bed, hands already busy, already thinking 3 steps ahead. She didn't look at the man on the floor. She didn't look at the people staring at her. She looked at the patient, because that was the only place that mattered. The gurney rolled, the doors opened, the night swallowed them and spit them back out under harsher lights. ICU smelled different, cleaner, colder, quieter in a way that carried weight. As they transferred the patient, a corner of the torn shirt slid aside. The winged dagger was clearer now. Mara's throat tightened. She hadn't seen that symbol in years, not since she'd burned it into memory under a sky that glowed orange and wrong. Someone handed her a clipboard. "Name?" the ICU nurse asked. Mara hesitated. Her brain filled the silence with an image she didn't want. A younger version of herself, kneeling in red dust, a man laughing through pain, a voice saying, "You're doing fine, Doc. Stay with me." She swallowed. "I don't know yet," she said, but she did. They stabilized him enough to get imaging. As the doors slid shut behind the gurney, Mara finally allowed herself to step back. Her hands trembled. Just once. She closed them into fists and forced them still. Behind her, the ER erupted. "What the hell do you think you were doing?" Grant Hale shouted, his voice raw with humiliation and fury. Security had arrived. 2 men in blue jackets who looked uncomfortable holding radios instead of answers. "She assaulted me," Hale barked, pointing at Mara. "She attacked the chief surgeon. I want her removed. Now." David stepped between them instinctively. "She saved his life," he said. "You were going to—" "Don't!" Hale snapped. "Don't you dare!" Mara turned. She looked smaller again in her oversized scrubs, blood speckled along the hem. Her hair was loose where Hale had grabbed it. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "I want to see the patient," she said. "You want—" Hale laughed, high and sharp. "You're done here. You're fired. Effective immediately." The word echoed. Fired. Security shifted. One of them cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." Mara nodded. No argument. No resistance. She took off her gloves and set them carefully on the counter, like she was finishing a routine task. "ICU room number?" she asked David quietly. He hesitated. "Mara, please." 6, he said. Bed 6. She nodded once. Then she let the guards lead her away. The holding room off the ER was never meant for staff. It had one chair bolted to the floor, a small desk, and a camera in the corner that blinked red like an unblinking eye. The walls were the color of resignation. Mara sat. She replayed the moment the needle went in, the sound of air escaping, the monitor coming back to life. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, counted, in, hold, out. The door opened. Not a guard, a doctor, older, gray at the temples, calm eyes that didn't flinch. Dr. Ellis Monroe, internal medicine, former Army, if the rumors were true. He closed the door behind him. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Mara didn't look up. Neither should he. Monroe sighed. "Grant's already calling legal." "Of course he is." Monroe studied her. "That was textbook decompression." "Yes." "You didn't hesitate." "No." "Where did you learn it?" Mara finally met his eyes. Somewhere it mattered. Monroe nodded slowly, like that was enough. "The patient," he said. "We got his name." Mara's chest tightened. "Who?" "Samuel Knox," Monroe said. 54, retired contractor, former Army Special Forces. The world tilted. Knox. Of course it was. Her hands clenched around the edge of the chair. "He alive?" she asked. "For now," Monroe said. "If you hadn't acted, he wouldn't be." Mara closed her eyes, because for now was the part that haunted her. Monroe leaned against the desk. "He asked for you." Her eyes snapped open. "What?" "When he came around, he said, 'Where's Quinn?'" The name hit like a punch. "I told him you were a nurse," Monroe continued gently. He laughed. Then he said, "Figures." Mara looked down at her hands. They were steady again. "I need to see him," she said. Monroe hesitated. "Grant." "I don't care about Grant." "I know," Monroe said. "But he does." The door opened again. 2 uniformed police officers stood in the hall. Hale was behind them, arms crossed, smugness poorly hiding panic. "That's her," Hale said. "She attacked me. I want charges filed." The officers looked at Mara. She stood slowly, didn't run, didn't argue. "Ma'am," one officer said, "we're going to need you to come with us." Mara nodded. "Can I say something first?" Hale scoffed. "No." Mara ignored him. "If he asks for me again," she said to Monroe, "tell him I'm sorry I was late." Monroe's eyes widened. The officers guided her away, down hallways she'd scrubbed, past people who wouldn't meet her gaze, into a police car waiting at the ambulance bay. The door shut with a final metallic click. As the car pulled away, Mara leaned her head back against the seat. Streetlights streaked past like tracer fire. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Once. She frowned. No one had that number. She slipped it out. Unknown number. One message. "He's awake. Asking for you." Her breath caught. Then another vibration. Another message. "And he's not the only one who knows where you are." Mara closed her eyes, because she knew what that meant. You didn't save a man like Samuel Knox without consequences. You didn't touch the battlefield without the battlefield touching back. And somewhere, far above the city, something was already moving. Police stations always smelled the same. Old coffee, disinfectant, paper that had absorbed too many bad decisions. Mara Quinn sat alone in interview room C, hands folded on the metal table, posture straight without effort. The chair was uncomfortable on purpose. The fluorescent light above her buzzed, slightly off rhythm, like it couldn't quite decide whether to stay on. She didn't fidget. She didn't pace. She waited. Across the table, Detective Aaron Bell flipped through a thin folder like it disappointed him. No priors, he said at last. Clean license. Employed 3 months at Ridgeway Medical. Fired tonight for assaulting a physician. Mara didn't correct him. Bell looked up. That doesn't usually end with a chief surgeon on the floor. Usually, Mara said softly, the chief surgeon doesn't put his hands on a nurse. Bell studied her face. He'd been doing this long enough to recognize certain tells. Mara had none of the ones he expected. No defensiveness, no performance, no fear, just control. Dr. Hale claims you attacked him unprovoked, Bell said. Mara tilted her head slightly. Is that what the video shows? Bell paused. There's no video, he said. Not yet. Mara nodded once, like she'd already assumed that. Silence settled between them. Then Bell leaned back. He also says you endangered a patient by performing a procedure without authorization. Mara met his eyes. That patient would be dead, she said evenly, if I hadn't. Bell didn't argue. He closed the folder. Look, he said, lowering his voice. This is complicated. Hale's family has influence, hospital board, donors, lawyers who bill more per hour than I make in a week. Mara's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. I know the type. Bell hesitated. You could make this easier on yourself. She waited. If you admit you lost control, Bell continued. Say you panicked. Maybe cite stress. We can downgrade this. Probation, license review, anger management. Mara exhaled slowly. I didn't panic, she said. Bell sighed. I figured you'd say that. The door opened. A man in an expensive suit stepped in like he owned the air. Mid-50s, perfect hair, perfect teeth. The kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Detective, the man said briskly. I'll take it from here. Bell stiffened. Sir, this is an active... I'm the attorney for Ridgeway Medical, the man interrupted. And for Dr. Hale. His eyes slid to Mara like she was a stain. Miss Quinn, he said, I'm offering you a lifeline. He placed a document on the table. Mara glanced at it. Confession. Psychological instability. Voluntary surrender of nursing license. In exchange, charges dropped. Sign, the lawyer said. And you walk out tonight. Mara looked up. And the patient? The lawyer frowned. Excuse me. The man in ICU, she said. Samuel Knox. Is he alive? That's irrelevant. No, Mara said quietly. That's the only thing that matters. The lawyer's patience snapped. You are nobody, he said sharply. A disposable nurse. Dr. Hale is a pillar of this community. You think a jury will side with you? Mara leaned back. I think, she said. You don't know who you're talking to. The lawyer laughed. Your file says otherwise. Mara stared at him for a long second. Then she spoke 4 words. I want one call. She dialed from memory. Not a phone number. A sequence. The line clicked once. Then a voice answered. Calm, controlled, familiar in a way that made something inside her finally loosen. This is Atlas, the voice said. Go. Mara didn't raise her voice. Atlas, she said. This is Quinn, Code Gray, Civilian Hold, Portland. Silence, then... Confirm. Patient Knox, Mara said. Alive. Compromised. The chair across from her scraped loudly as the lawyer stood. What is she doing? He snapped. Mara ignored him. I need extraction, she said into the phone. And eyes on Ridgeway. A breath. Stand by, Atlas said. Do not sign anything. The line went dead. The lawyer scoffed. Cute. Is that your brother? Mara met his gaze. No, she said. It's my past. The door burst open, not slammed, opened with authority. Detective Bell stood abruptly. Behind him were two men who didn't belong in a police station. No badges, no uniforms, just presence. Tall, broad, calm in the way dangerous people were calm. One of them spoke. "Ms. Quinn," he said, "you're coming with us." The lawyer laughed. "Absolutely not. She's in custody." The second man finally looked at him. "You should leave," he said. "Excuse me." "You have 60 seconds, the man continued, voice level. "After that, this conversation becomes federal." Bell swallowed. "Sir," he said to the lawyer, "maybe we should—" The lawyer's phone rang. He answered, still smirking. Then his face changed. Color drained. "Yes," he said quickly. "Of course, I understand." He hung up, hands shaking. He didn't look at Mara again. The cuffs were removed. Mara stood. One of the men handed her a jacket, black, plain, heavy. "Knox is asking for you," he said. Her chest tightened. "Where?" "Ridgeway," the man replied. "And you're not the only one on the way." The hospital parking lot looked different at night. Too quiet, too open. Mara stepped out of the unmarked vehicle and felt it immediately. The shift in pressure, the way the air hummed before something big arrived. The first thump hit her chest before she heard it. Rotor wash. Lights flared. Security guards froze. A helicopter descended. Not a medevac. Matte black. Unmarked. Wrong for this place. Windows rattled. The machine didn't ask permission. It took space. People stared from the windows of Ridgeway Medical as the bird touched down like it had always belonged there. Mara pulled the jacket tighter around herself. She knew that sound. Knew it better than lullabies. The side door slid open. Boots hit pavement. Men moved with purpose. Fast, efficient, scanning. One of them looked at Mara. Recognition flashed. "About damn time," he said. She almost smiled. Inside the hospital, Dr. Grant Hale was still ranting. He didn't hear the rotors at first. Didn't notice the way nurses stopped moving. How conversations died. He was too busy rehearsing his version of events until the automatic doors blew open and the past walked in. Hospitals knew how to do silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that pressed down on your ears when something irreversible was about to happen. The automatic doors at Ridgeway Medical slid open and stayed open, jammed by the force of the wind. Papers lifted, curtains snapped. A half-empty gurney rolled 3 inches on its own and stopped. Rotor wash. People froze. Dr. Grant Hale stood near the nurses' station mid-sentence, mouth open, hand raised like he was about to deliver another lecture no one wanted. The words died in his throat when the windows began to rattle. "What the hell is that?" someone whispered. Outside, the helicopter settled into the parking lot with a low, predatory growl. It was matte black, stripped of markings, its lights dimmed like it had something to hide, or nothing to prove. This wasn't a medevac. This was an arrival. 4 men moved first. No running, no hesitation. They flowed out of the aircraft in practiced arcs, scanning angles, hands low and ready. Their clothes were plain. Dark jackets, boots that had seen worse floors than hospital tile. But their posture marked them instantly. Not visitors, not security. The ER felt it before anyone understood it. Authority entered the room without asking. One of the men keyed a mic at his collar. "Package on site." Another answered from inside the bird. "Eyes on ICU." Mara Quinn stepped through the doors last. She wore the black jacket they'd given her, unmarked. Heavy enough to feel like armor. Her hair was still slightly loose where Hale had grabbed it. Her face was calm, but the part of her that had been asleep for months, maybe years, was fully awake now. She didn't look around. She knew exactly where she was going. Grant Hale recovered first, because men like him always did. "You can't be here," he snapped, finding his voice. "This is a private medical facility. Security." He turned, searching for someone who would save him. No one moved. David stood near the trauma desk, hands hovering uselessly at his sides. Chloe had pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide. Nurses lined the hallway like spectators at a storm. The lead man stopped in front of Hale. He was tall, broad, beard trimmed close. His eyes were pale and tired in a way that spoke of long nights and longer consequences. "Where is Samuel Knox?" the man asked. Hale bristled. "That information is protected by—" The man leaned in just enough that Hale could smell rain and jet fuel. "Where?" he repeated softly. "Is my operator?" Hale swallowed. "In ICU, he said. Bed 6. "Thank you," the man replied, already turning away. Mara walked past Hale without looking at him. He reached out, instinctively, an attempt to reclaim control. "Quinn!" he barked. "You are not authorized!" Mara stopped. Slowly, she turned. For the first time since Hale had met her, she didn't look down. "You put your hands on me," she said, voice even, carrying easily in the quiet hall. "You ignored a dying man, and you lied to police." Hale scoffed, though the sound came out thin. "You assaulted me." One of the men behind Mara shifted his weight. "You want to keep talking?" he asked Hale pleasantly. "Because we can keep talking, or we can let the footage speak." Hale's face drained of color. "What footage?" David inhaled sharply. "Trauma Bay 1, the man continued. "Multiple angles, audio included." The hallway seemed to tilt. Hale laughed once, sharp and brittle. "That's impossible." Mara met his eyes. "Nothing about tonight is impossible," she said. "They didn't cuff him. Not yet." They walked away from him like he wasn't worth the effort. ICU was quiet in a different way. Machines whispered instead of screamed. Lights were dimmed. The air felt thicker, heavier with consequences. Samuel Knox lay propped up against pillows, chest wrapped, oxygen tubing resting beneath his nose. He looked like hell. He smiled anyway. "Well," he rasped, voice rough. "Took you long enough." Mara stepped to his side. For a moment, the world narrowed to the two of them. "You're not allowed to talk," she said. Knox grinned. "You always said that." She checked his vitals automatically, fingers gentle, precise. "Collapsed lung," she said. "You scared everyone." Knox's eyes softened. "You saved me." She paused. "I should have been faster." His hand lifted weakly, catching her sleeve. "You were right on time." The man from the hallway, Atlas, though no one here knew that name, stood back, giving them space. Knox looked past Mara, then back at her. "They try to burn you?" She nodded once. "Good," Knox murmured. "Means they still underestimate you." Her mouth twitched despite herself. Outside the room, voices rose. "Sir, you can't go in there," a nurse protested. "I'm the chief surgeon," Hale shouted. "I demand—" Atlas stepped into the doorway without turning around. "Not anymore," he said. "What?" Hale sputtered. Atlas finally faced him. "Effective immediately," he said, calm as ice. "You are relieved of duty pending federal investigation." "Federal?" Hale laughed weakly. "For what?" Atlas held up a tablet. On the screen, a paused video frame. Trauma Bay 1. Mara cornered, Hale's hand in her hair. Audio waveforms spiking. "This," Atlas said, "and what you almost did to my man." Hale backed up a step. "You don't have jurisdiction." Atlas smiled. "Careful," he said. "You're starting to sound like someone who doesn't know how small he is." The confrontation didn't end with shouting. It ended with paper. 2 hours later, in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and panic, the hospital administrator sat pale and sweating at the head of the table. Lawyers whispered. Phones buzzed endlessly. Mara stood by the window, looking down at the parking lot where the helicopter waited, rotors finally silent. Atlas approached her quietly. "We're pulling the footage," he said. "All of it. We're also digging into Hale's history." Mara didn't turn. "Do it fast," she said. "If he's been this reckless, there will be others." Atlas studied her. "You didn't want this life anymore." "No," she said. "But I won't let him hurt anyone else." He nodded. "That's why we came." Behind them, Knox slept, alive. Outside, Grant Hale sat alone on a plastic chair, hands shaking, white coat folded uselessly over his arm. No one stood with him now. No one met his eyes. The room had chosen a side, and for the first time it wasn't his. By morning, the story had escaped the building. It slipped through cracked doors and whispered phone calls, rode elevators, and hit send on messages that weren't meant to travel. By the time dawn smeared gray across Portland's sky, Ridgeway Medical was already trending for all the wrong reasons. Chief surgeon removed after ER incident. Nurse assault or life-saving heroics. Federal presence confirmed at Ridgeway. The headlines didn't agree, but they didn't have to. Confusion was a weapon. Mara Quinn watched the news from a chair in ICU, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. She hadn't slept. She hadn't left Knox's side except when the nurses forced her to sit. Samuel Knox lay resting now, sedated lightly, chest tube in place, color back where death had tried to steal it. Every rise and fall of his breathing felt like a quiet victory. Atlas stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and controlled. "No," he said. "We're not burying this. We're preserving it." He ended the call and turned to Mara. "They're moving fast." "Who?" she asked. "Hale's people," Atlas replied. "Family attorneys, PR firms, crisis managers who charge more than a trauma surgeon makes in a year." Mara nodded. "So they're scared." Atlas gave a thin smile. "Very." Down the hall, the atmosphere had changed. Nurses clustered together now, not whispering but talking, sharing, comparing stories. David stood with Chloe and 2 ICU nurses, their faces tight with anger. "He did that to you?" Chloe said, eyes flashing. "He grabbed you?" David shook his head. "He did worse to others. We just never had proof." Atlas followed Mara's gaze. "We're finding it." "Good," Mara said, "because he won't stop." As if summoned by the thought, a notification buzzed on Atlas's phone. He showed it to her. A press conference announcement. Sterling Hale to address media at noon. Mara's jaw tightened. "He's flipping the narrative," Atlas said. "Fast and loud." At noon, the hospital atrium looked like a staged miracle. Cameras packed shoulder to shoulder. Microphones sprouted like weeds. Donor plaques gleamed under polished lights. Sterling Hale, Grant's father, stood at the podium in a charcoal suit that cost more than Mara's monthly rent. Silver hair, calm smile, the face of benevolent authority. "My son," Sterling began, voice smooth as oil, "has dedicated his life to saving others. What happened last night was a tragedy, but also a misunderstanding." Mara watched from a small conference room upstairs, feed streaming on a tablet. Sterling continued. "A temporary nurse, recently hired, experienced an emotional episode. Stress can manifest in dangerous ways. We have reason to believe untreated trauma played a role." Mara exhaled slowly through her nose. PTSD. Of course. She endangered a patient, Sterling said gravely, and assaulted my son. We are cooperating with authorities to ensure safety. Atlas's knuckles whitened around the tablet. He's framing you, he said. Textbook. He's lying, Mara replied. Textbook. Sterling leaned closer to the microphones. We will not allow our hospital to be held hostage by rogue behavior. Mara stood. Turn it off, she said. Atlas paused the feed. You ready for the rest? He asked. She nodded. The conference room door closed behind them, sealing out the noise. A dozen people waited inside. Federal investigators, digital forensics. 2 nurses Mara recognized, David among them, looking nervous but resolute. On the table sat 3 laptops and a stack of manila folders. This started with Hale, the lead investigator said. It didn't end with him. He clicked a remote. The screen filled with records, settlements, non-disclosure agreements, surgical errors quietly buried, wrong site procedures, medication overdoses, deaths ruled complications when they weren't. Case numbers stacked like headstones. Mara felt a slow burn build behind her ribs. How many? She asked. More than 20, the investigator replied. Over 10 years. David swallowed hard. We suspected, but every time someone spoke up, they disappeared. Or got reassigned, Chloe added quietly. Atlas folded his arms. Sterling Hale didn't just protect his son. He built a system that erased consequences. The investigator nodded. We need corroboration, internal witnesses, access to archived logs before they vanish. Mara's eyes sharpened. They'll purge the servers, she said. Yes, the investigator replied. Soon. Silence settled. Then Chloe spoke. Kinsley. All eyes turned to her. She works nights in records, Chloe continued. She manages the trauma archive backups. She sees everything. Atlas looked at Mara. Can she be trusted? Mara didn't hesitate. She's scared, but she's not corrupt. The investigator checked his watch. If Sterling's smart, and he is, we have maybe an hour. Atlas sighed. We can't raid a civilian hospital. Mara stood. Then don't, she said. They looked at her. I know the building, she continued. I know the cameras. I know where the servers are. Atlas frowned. You're not operational anymore. Mara met his eyes. Neither was Knox, she said, until last night. The investigator hesitated. If you're caught, I won't be, Mara said calmly. And if I am, it buys you time. David stared at her. You don't owe us this. Mara shook her head. I owe the people who didn't make it. Atlas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once. 30 minutes, he said. No heroics. Mara almost smiled. The basement of Ridgeway Medical smelled like steam and bleach. Mara moved through it like memory had laid the path for her. Maintenance corridors, blind spots, doors that stuck if you lifted instead of pushed. She wore a borrowed jacket and a badge clipped low. Nothing special, just enough to belong. A voice murmured in her earpiece. Camera ahead. Pause. She paused. Clear. She moved again. The server room sat behind administrative offices, humming softly like a living thing. Blue lights blinked in steady patterns. Kinsley stood inside, pale and shaking. They're wiping it, she whispered, gesturing to a screen. Remote purge. 90%. Mara's gaze flicked to the progress bar. Too fast. We take the hardware, Mara said. Kinsley nodded, tears streaking down her face. The door exploded inward. 2 men in dark suits rushed in. Private security, not hospital staff. One raised a baton, the other leveled a gun. Step away, the gunman ordered. Mara lifted her hands slowly. Easy, she said. I'm just... She threw the wrench she'd grabbed from a janitor's cart. It struck bone with a wet crack. Chaos erupted. Mara closed distance, controlled space, and moved bodies where they couldn't hurt anyone else. No wasted motion, no rage, just efficiency. Kinsley screamed. The progress bar hit 98%. Mara ripped the drive free. The screen went black. Sirens wailed somewhere above them. She turned to Kinsley. Run. Back in the atrium, Sterling Hale smiled for the cameras. Behind him, the massive display flickered. Static, then video, Trauma Bay 1, audio clear. Know your place. The slap, the grab. Gasps tore through the crowd. The screen shifted. Documents scrolled. Case numbers, names, settlements. Sterling's smile collapsed. "What is this?" he shouted. "Turn it off!" The doors opened. Atlas walked in with federal agents. And beside him, dirty jacket, scraped knuckles, hard drive in hand, stood Mara Quinn. The room fell silent. For once, the truth was louder than money. The applause didn't start right away. First came the silence, the kind that spreads when a room realizes it has been lied to for a very long time. Reporters stared at the screens as if the pixels might apologize. Board members shifted in their seats, suddenly unsure where to put their hands. Someone dropped a pen. The sound echoed too loudly. Sterling Hale stood frozen at the podium, mouth opening and closing like a man trying to breathe underwater. "This is fabricated," he finally choked. "A cyber attack. An AI." "Mr. Hale," a voice cut in. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. A federal agent stepped forward, credentials already in hand. "You are being detained pending investigation for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to conceal medical negligence, and witness intimidation." Sterling laughed once, high, brittle. "You don't have the authority." The agent nodded to the side. 2 uniformed state troopers appeared. Handcuffs came out, solid and unmistakable. The sound of metal on metal snapped the room back into motion. Cameras surged forward, microphones lunged. Sterling's eyes darted wildly, searching for allies who were already backing away. When the cuffs closed around his wrists, something inside him finally collapsed. "No," he whispered. "You can't." They led him off the stage as flashbulbs erupted, the truth finally brighter than money. From the edge of the atrium, a single clap sounded, slow, deliberate. Mara turned. Samuel Knox sat in a wheelchair near the back, oxygen tank hissing softly beside him. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. He clapped again, then again. David stepped forward from the crowd, jaw tight, eyes wet. He joined in. Chloe followed. Then Kinsley, hands trembling but resolute. Nurses from every department, trauma, ICU, pediatrics, oncology, began to clap, the sound swelling until it filled the space Sterling Hale had once owned. Mara didn't smile. She stood still, holding the hard drive like it weighed more than it should. Atlas moved to her side. "You okay?" She nodded, though the word felt small for what was moving through her chest. The applause crested and then fell away, leaving a strange calm behind it. The press scattered to chase new angles. Agents fanned out. The hospital administrator slumped into a chair, staring at nothing. Mara walked to Knox. "You should be resting," she said. He grinned faintly. "I'll rest later." She adjusted the blanket at his knees, professional instinct grounding her. "You scared me." "I'm good at that," he said. Then quieter. "You saved more than my life tonight." She shook her head. "I just stopped it from happening again." Knox watched her for a long beat. "They'll ask you to come back." She didn't ask who they were. I know. The conference room upstairs was empty now except for 4 people. Mara, Atlas, Knox, and a woman in a navy blazer who introduced herself as Deputy Director Collins. Collins folded her hands. Commander-level recommendations are already being drafted. Mara winced at the title. We want you reinstated, Collins continued, with protections, resources, authority to shape outcomes. Atlas leaned back, studying Mara's face. Knox stayed quiet, letting her breathe. Mara looked out the window at the city. Wet streets, traffic moving like nothing monumental had just happened. I don't want to deploy, she said. Collins nodded. We're not asking you to. Atlas raised an eyebrow. Mara turned back. I don't want to chase ghosts anymore. I don't want to be the last resort when everything else fails. Knox's voice was gentle. What do you want? She thought of the nurses standing shoulder to shoulder in the hallway, of Kinsley's shaking hands steadying around a keyboard, of David finally speaking when it counted. I want to build something, Mara said. Here, or somewhere like here. Collins considered that. Say more. A rapid response medical oversight team, Mara continued, words finding their shape. Embedded training, trauma protocol audits that can't be buried by NDAs, protection for staff who speak up, real consequences. Atlas smiled slowly. That's ambitious. Mara met his eyes. So was landing a bird in a parking lot. Knox laughed and immediately regretted it, coughing into his sleeve. She's not wrong. Collins nodded once. I'll take it upstairs. When she left, the room felt lighter. Atlas stood. You sure? Mara nodded. I'm sure. He offered his hand. Then this is where I say goodbye. She took it. This is where I say thank you. He squeezed once, firm. You were never invisible. When Atlas left, Knox lingered. You could have burned it all down, he said. You chose not to. Mara exhaled. Fire takes too much with it. He studied her, then smiled. I'll be around. Someone's got to tell the story right. She smiled back. Small, real. That evening, the ER returned to work. Not normal, different, better. Mara changed back into clean scrubs, hair retied, sleeves rolled just enough to show the faint outline of old scars. She didn't hide them anymore. David met her near the station. Trauma Bay 4 needs hands. She nodded. On it. As she walked, conversations softened rather than stopped. Eyes met hers, not in awe, in respect. In Bay 4, a patient cried quietly. Mara took his hand, explained what was happening, stayed until his breathing slowed. Outside the bay, Knox watched from his wheelchair, pride shining through exhaustion. Later, when the floor finally caught its breath, Mara stood alone by the window. The city hummed. The night felt ordinary again. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You did the right thing. She didn't need to ask who sent it. Mara slipped the phone into her pocket and headed back toward the noise. The good kind now. The kind that meant people were being helped. The war she'd left hadn't followed her here. But the courage had. And this time, it stayed. 6 months later, the building still smelled like antiseptic. Some things didn't change. They didn't need to. Ridgeway Medical had new plaques on the wall now. Polished brass, carefully worded. Patient Safety Oversight Initiative, Staff Advocacy Program. Names followed, committees and donors and dates. But what mattered wasn't on the wall. It lived in how people spoke to each other. Mara Quinn walked through the emergency department just before shift change, coffee in one hand, tablet tucked under her arm. The morning rush had broken. The night crew looked tired but steadier than they once had. No flinching when a doctor raised their voice. No glances toward the floor when someone asked a hard question. David stood at the whiteboard, finishing handoff. He paused when he saw her and nodded, a small, easy gesture. Chloe leaned against the counter, laughing softly with a resident who looked young enough to still believe medicine was simple. It wasn't. But it didn't have to be cruel. Mara stopped outside Trauma Bay 1. The doors were open now. That had been her first change. No closed rooms. No private kingdoms. Only patients and teams. She stepped inside. A young man lay on the bed, pale and scared, hands shaking beneath the thin sheet. His girlfriend stood beside him, eyes red, trying to be brave. Mara approached calmly. "I'm Mara," she said. "I'm going to stay with you while we figure this out." The man nodded, swallowing hard. She explained every step. She answered every question. She waited until his breathing slowed before moving on. Outside the bay, a new chief surgeon, Dr. Elena Ruiz, watched quietly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush. When Mara stepped out, Ruiz smiled. "You make it look easy." Mara shook her head. "I just remember what it's like to be on the table." Ruiz nodded. "We're lucky to have you." Luck had nothing to do with it. The courtroom downtown was packed. Mara didn't sit in the front row. She didn't want to. From the back, she watched as names were read, charges filed, pleas entered, evidence presented. Not just against one man, but against a system that had mistaken silence for order. Sterling Hale sat smaller now, shoulders hunched, eyes darting. Grant Hale hadn't looked up once. When the judge spoke, the words were measured and final. There would be trials, settlements, reforms mandated by law. None of it felt like victory. It felt like accountability. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Microphones lifted when they saw her. "Mara Quinn," one called. "Former nurse, former—" She stopped walking. She turned, met their eyes. "I'm a nurse," she said evenly. "That's enough." She left them standing there with their questions and their headlines. That afternoon, the classroom filled slowly. 24 chairs, 24 faces, nurses from across the state, some fresh, some worn thin, all paying attention. Mara stood at the front, sleeves rolled, tablet dark. "No slides today," she said. "We're going to talk." They leaned in. "Protocols matter," she continued. "Titles matter, but patients matter more. If you see something wrong, you say it. If you're ignored, you say it louder. And if someone tells you to know your place—" She paused. "Remember that your place is between harm and the person who can't protect themselves." A hand went up. "What if it costs us our job?" Mara nodded. "Then we make sure it doesn't." Another hand. "What if we're wrong?" "Then we learn," Mara replied. "And we keep people alive long enough to do it." They wrote, they listened, they asked questions that used to get people labeled as difficult. Now, they were expected. Samuel Knox visited once a month. Sometimes he brought donuts. Sometimes he brought silence. They sat on the bench outside the ambulance bay, watching the doors slide open and shut. "You could have left," he said one evening. "I did," Mara replied. "I just came back." He smiled. "You found your war." She considered that. "No," she said. "I found my people." He nodded, satisfied. When he left that night, she watched him walk without help, shoulders squared against the wind. Alive. On a quiet night shift, Mara found herself alone in Trauma Bay 1. The lights hummed softly. The monitors waited. She stood where she'd once been shoved, where fear had tried to take the wheel. She breathed. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It informed. Her phone buzzed. A message from Kinsley. Whistleblower Protections passed committee. We did it. Mara smiled. Outside, sirens wailed. New problems, new chances. She pulled on gloves. All right, she murmured to the room. Let's work. The story didn't end with applause. It didn't end with arrests or reforms or clean endings wrapped in ribbon. It ended with consistency, with people choosing again and again to speak, to stand, to care. Mara Quinn walked back into the noise, not hiding, not fighting ghosts, but building something that would outlast her. And that was enough.